I'm not going to talk about racism against black people or anything like that in this video. Instead, I'm going to talk about racism against the Celtic or Gaelic people in Scotland. And this might come as a surprise because Scotland is often considered a Celtic nation. For instance, the Wolftones put them as part of their 6 Celtic nations. However, before I go into the racism, I should explain a little bit of the history. Scotland has always been divided between the Highlands and the Lowlands. Even before the Romans came here, lowland Scotland was considered part of the Old North, which was more closely connected to northern England. And even during the Anglo-Saxon migrations over here, Edinburgh and a lot of the lowlands would have fallen under Saxon rule as part of the Kingdom of Northumbria. Because of this, the Scots language developed separate from Gaelic, and by at least the 7th century, it was the prevalent language up until the River Forth, cutting Scotland essentially in half. And I should also say that in 1916, Benezet, an American, produced a map of Europe as it should be, and he drew the borders of Scotland pretty much at the River Forth. Everything south of that would, in his mind, be part of England. There were of course other nationalities to come over to Scotland. For instance, the Outer Hebrides were once controlled by the Vikings, and Robert the Bruce and the likes were of Norman stock. But northern mainland Scotland at least remained largely untouched. And this became particularly important when scientific racism developed in the 18th and 19th century, especially during the Highland potato famine of the mid-19th century. Robert Knox, a famous Scottish scientist, supported this idea of a sort of hierarchy of nations with the Germanic Scots on top. And so too did John Pinkerton, who in the 1780s said that the Picts were in fact Goths, and Scots language was therefore the true language of Scotland because it was Germanic, and the Celtic people here in Scotland were just imposters. In 1851, here in Edinburgh, the Emigrant's Manual was published, and this further emphasised some of the beliefs at the time. For instance, it said that many people thought that the Celtic people in Scotland were a tropic race and therefore should emigrate to hotter climates like Bermuda. Author John Hill Burton disagreed that they should go to Bermuda, but did say that they should emigrate because he said that the Celtic people were unproductive and hopeless. And he said that collective emigration was the removal of a distressed and damaged part of society, and he weighed up other options like Australia and Canada. The others saw the northern Scottish people as some sort of wild barbarian Irishmen, but many Irish people disagreed with this, especially after James Macpherson published Ossian, a sort of collection of ancient Celtic works. This is largely held to be a forgery, but even at the time many people questioned its authenticity. For instance, in Sidney Lady Morgan's book The Wild Irish Girl, which was published in 1808 in Ireland, it says that the Scots had no history of their own and were stealing Irish history. Northern Scottish people were getting abuse from pretty much everybody in Britain, and if you're interested in some sort of independence movement for Northern Scotland, I suggest you look up the 15th century Lord of the Isles. John MacDonald II governed the Outer Hebrides in northern Scotland virtually independently, but to secure this independence he tried to forge an alliance with the English and get them to invade, and then he'd be allowed to break free. But the Wars of the Roses prevented this from happening. Even this historic event played into racism in 19th century Scotland, because one historian, Andrew Lang, said that this was a stab in the back with a Celtic dirk, so they couldn't really win there. Today, the only real talk of independence within Scotland is with places like Orkney, I suppose, but they were historically more Nordic than Celtic.